There are three ways that we can control animation speed in our slideshow. The first of those I think is probably the most obvious. It's the distance versus time. Let's take a quick look at that. I've got a sky picture here and I've set the slide duration to 12 seconds. I'm going to open this up into the Objects and Animation screen, and I'm going to go to my Add an Image icon, and I'm going to add a little hot air balloon. A little bit too big at the moment, so let's go over to the zoom option and set this back to the original size. And I'm going to place my balloon up at the top left. I'm going to animate this balloon just to simply fly across the top of that sky. So I need to add another keyframe. I'm going to use Alt and Enter to put in place a cloned keyframe, and I can just drag that to the end and then move my balloon to the end point controlled by this keyframe. I'll use the pan X, click on the X and just drag to the right. So there you can see the animation I've created. If we go back to the start, just remember we've got 12 seconds for the balloon to fly from one side of the screen to the other. Now, as balloons go, it's probably flying a little bit on the fast side. But nevertheless, you get an idea of how quick the balloon needs to move in the 12 seconds we have. Now, to save me going out of the Objects and Animation screen and reducing my slide duration to 6 seconds, I can do much the same thing here by just temporarily moving the second keyframe. If I were to set the second keyframe back to the 6-second point, then I hope I'm not making this a little too obvious. The animation clearly has to run a great deal faster to cope with the distance we've applied and the time we've allowed. And of course, if I doubled up my original 12 seconds, then the balloon is going to fly extremely slow. But there may be certain circumstances where we have to restrict the amount of animation we need to give. In other words, we would like to have the animation moving from extreme left to extreme right, but perhaps the music and the project we're working on won't allow that. That happens sometimes. In that case, we need to reduce the amount of movement of the object, text or image. In this case here, instead of starting extreme left, we could start a little bit further in, and instead of finishing extreme right, once again we can finish a little bit further in. So although we've now only got our 6 seconds, we've slowed down the balloon considerably, but of course we've affected the movement at the same time. The final way to control speed we could call variable speed. Do we want the image, object or text, in our case a hot air balloon, accelerating from its starting point, slowing down, or do we want it smooth throughout the movement? The default setting that we've just looked at is linear, meaning it's the same speed throughout. But what we select, or what speed selection we choose, is going to depend on the animation we have in mind. If we're bringing an image onto the screen, then we may select a speed setting of slowing down. But if we want the same image to leave the screen, then a more appropriate setting could be to have it accelerating. Linear speed is suitable when our subject is being animated for the entire slide duration, and that would include the fade in, which we can see with the grey bar here, and also the fade out over on the right hand side. In that case, we don't see a start or a stop to our animated image, text or object. And what we're referring to here, of course, is that little jolt you get right at the start. If I just show you this again, you can see the balloon starts with a bit of an abrupt start, and when it gets to the end of its travel, it will stop with a bit of a clonk. And of course, the shorter the distance and the faster the animation, the more evident that will be. But if I were to take this keyframe and drop it to the end, I'm now using the entire slide duration. But in this case, if I have my animation starting off the screen and the balloon flying right the way through, of course we don't even, in this instance, see the start and stop. So the linear speed option here, which is the default, is adequate for our needs. What I've done here is added a few more balloons. They're all going to fly from one side to the other, but what we can do is apply a different speed setting to each to give us a feel for what those speeds are actually doing. But to start, we need to press play and just take a look at what we have at the moment, because what we have there is linear speed, and as you can see, all of the balloons are flying in perfect formation from one side to the other. Now let me set back my animation to the start, and one of the most important things when we're going to apply any speed settings is to correctly identify the image we want to actually apply the speed to, and also to the correct keyframe, because most of the mistakes that I've made is because I've got one of those two things wrong. Well, in actual fact, I've got balloon 1 selected, but I want to leave that one alone. Let's allow that one to fly in a linear fashion. So we'll select balloon 2, we'll identify the starting keyframe, and because we're just panning from left to right, I can go to my pan controls, add a speed modifier, and we'll take them from the top down. So we'll apply firstly accelerate. Now we need to select balloon 3. You'll notice that the keyframe for balloon 3 remains selected. So here I can go back to my pan, add modifier, and select slow down. Going down to balloon 4 to select it, I can go back to my modifier for the pan and apply the smooth option. Now we can press play over on the left hand side, and we can see how those speed settings affect each of the balloons. Everything looks quite different when we get midway along, but towards the end they more or less arrive at the same time. Well, they would do, wouldn't they? Because they're all travelling the same distance. Let's take a look at that once more. Linear at the top, then we have accelerate, slowing down, and smooth. Now, just to make this even more obvious, I was just about to put some text attached to each of these so I could label them to the speed setting that was applied to each. But in doing so, I've realised there is something I can impart to you here which may be useful into the future. I'm going to go to my balloon 1, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to add text. This one is called linear, L-I-N-E-A-R. You can see it's a little bit jumbled on the balloon, so let's go to the animation. Let's click and drag on the zoom, click and drag on the pan, and now I've got my linear alongside the blue balloon. Now if we were to be doing work like this, and this is the reason I've come back to this, rather than do that 3 other times, there's a quicker way. If we select the text, right click, we can choose copy. Then if we select balloon 2, right click, we can paste. And as you see, we get exactly the same thing, and we can do the same with 3, we can paste it there too, and 4. Saves us a lot of time, because then all we've got to do is to select the text we want to change, go to the properties, and adjust it here. Now, having adjusted those others and made the names correct, if I press play, we can see exactly what we have. Now, what I've actually done here while going through this particular demonstration is also to introduce you to the parent and child relationship. We're going to be looking at this in more detail, but I don't think I can leave this video without saying something about the text that we've applied. Because I applied it and it's linked, you can see it's linked to the picture above in each case, which is unlike the image here, which is our base image, which is isolated from the others. So wherever the parent goes, and the parent in our case is flying from one side of the screen to the other, then the child goes with it, and in our case the child is text. But we can use the parent and child relationship in much more sophisticated animation, and especially when we get to look at some of the 3D options